Hey everyone, Athalus here from Warcraft Radio. I'm excited to share our interview with Morgan Day, recorded on March 30th in just a few minutes here. The race to World First Sepulcher of the First Ones was a wild time, giving us the longest race in RWF's broadcasted history, with challenging bosses throughout. In fact, Shadowlands had a lot of standout raid encounters, but it had a few misses as well. Back in 2020, just before the world ended and Ny'alotha had just been cleared, I sat down with Ian Hazzikostas. We had a great discussion about how the team planned to support the race to World First as it continued to gain in popularity. We addressed the excitement around RWF, but we also addressed the issues and outright bugs that occurred in Ny'alotha. Ian committed that Blizzard would ultimately do more to support the race in the future. Flash forward to today, I had the chance to follow up with recently promoted Associate Game Director Morgan Day, who shared a number of the design innovations, staffing changes, and procedural improvements the team has made to better support the race to World First in Shadowlands. We also discussed a couple of the prominent issues that popped up in the race, talked about the upcoming Shadowlands Season 4, and many other topics. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this interview. You can follow me over on Twitter at AthalusWCR as well as at Warcraft Radio. Be sure to let us know what you think about all this. We're also going to be publishing this interview both on our YouTube channel at Warcraft Radio, as well as on the Realm Maintenance podcast feed if you prefer an audio version of this 1-hour interview. If you do get the podcast version of this, we're also going to have a couple bonus features. We do have an interview with the Doctor 3 podcast for Hearthstone, where we'll be talking about the latest in the Hearthstone community. And we also have our RNG segment with Race to World First caster Kexman. So without further ado, let's jump right into our interview with Morgan Day to discuss 9.2's raid Sepulcher of the First Ones. Morgan, hey, thanks for taking some time with us today. It's been a long race to World First. We actually had to reschedule almost because we went a little bit further than we thought. So I've got a lot of questions for you, and I'm glad we got a full hour to go through all these. So I want to start by saying, more so than normal maybe. I think the general community perception is there was incredible boss tuning this round. It's been widely praised boss design. Some of the examples people have called out, Halondrus, Ry'Galon, Mythic Jailer, Lords of Dread, all pretty good examples of design this time around. It honestly seems, and just from what I'm hearing, that the raid design team has kind of been running on a new level this expansion. And I don't know if there's been changes in design philosophy, things of that nature that maybe have impacted that, but that's kind of something I want to dig in with you. There have been a few misses, I felt like, where right after Payne Smith in Sanctum, you had Guardian, Fate Scribe, Kel'Thuzad kind of seemed to flop over in terms of difficulty, but what changes were made in the design philosophy, processes, tools, and things like that that kind of set us up for some of these great boss encounters in Sepulcher?
Yeah, absolutely. Really proud of, all of our raid tiers that we've released with the Shadowlands. And like you mentioned, like the tuning has been really something that we've been working really hard to dial in. There was a long period of time where I always used to talk about raid tuning as like, this is really an art, right? Like there's a lot of like, I'm going to run some numbers in my spreadsheets, but we've been really working hard to kind of turn that more into a science than an art. And we're getting to see some of, the results of that with the Shadowlands raid tiers. And as we've kind of gotten better at that, there's actually quite a bit of really interesting the technology essentially that we've been developing under the hood that have enabled us to do some really cool things that we initially started to build for things like the levels, the level squish that we did with the Shadowlands launch that we've been able to leverage in some of our other elements of the game, such as our raid tuning, where we can essentially say that, hey, we know how much health we think works for, let's say, a boss 1. And in the past, we've had to kind of like constantly increase those numbers over time, where now we have built more systems that say, hey, this is essentially like the health of what we want this creature to be. Now let's calculate, kind of the power delta between this tier and next tier and apply that to all of our creatures. So there's, this is more into like the technicals of it, but, we have creatures that have health mods, right? Like there's a 1 health mod. That is what an outdoor creature is. And then a raid boss is just like, okay, it's a 300 health mod, which means you have 300 times more health than an outdoor creature. And that number used to just escalate and escalate and escalate as we went on. Now we have, this is what a raid boss should be for boss 1. And now we have a lot of things under the hood that we can kind of adjust to make that always true. And like, hey, this is how much damage you need to hit a tank for to make it really hurt. And then that number used to go up, but now we know, cool, this is the number. Then we do some tuning under the hood with a lot of the like scaling tech that we got, and that makes it a lot more consistent. that has its benefits, as you've mentioned, where that will mean that we can be a lot more consistent, but it also means if, one of the potential downsides is that if we are off in that regard, instead of just like in the past, it was one designer might have been like, I was off on my numbers a little bit. This boss was too easy. Now that could mean, everything is too easy, or everything is too hard. So, with great power and all of that. But that is definitely something that the team has been focusing a lot on, and have seen a lot of really great results based on that. There's still some, outliers here and there, but for the most part, that's definitely an area we've been working on.
Was that for the whole expansion that system was in place? And the reason I ask that is, as I mentioned, we had 3 bosses in a row between Painsmith and Sylvanas where it felt like they kind of fell over more quickly. And then in Sepulcher, you almost had the opposite issue, if you will, where there were several bosses where the HP actually had to get nerfed. And I'm just kind of wondering if that might all be tied into that system, and maybe the tuning got missed a little bit in those cases.
Totally. Well, I mean, certainly there's a lot of, moving pieces with an encounter. I think Kel'Thuzad's an interesting one in that, there was some numbers tuning that was, I think, actually pretty on point, but there were some strategies and tactics that actually, I think it was Echo, kind of found an interesting use of game mechanics that they used very late at night. So like, that was something that was hard for us to catch in real time. As you saw, actually, that was a tactic that we determined we should fix even after the kill, but we did it, quite a bit later to give other people, not to create an unfair situation where they had gotten a kill using a certain strat. But we felt like that was something that was worth resolving and making, appropriate adjustments to go along with it. That, ended up putting that fight in a much better place. So that was, one of those cases where there's a lot of nuance between just what is our tuning for, like, how much damage can you do and how much healing can you do versus like, well, how many mechanics are going on, right? There's a lot more space in between there.
That makes sense. So just in general with this race, it's the longest race in what I've been calling televised history, right? At least since the race has been on the air, right? Are you pretty happy with how long it went? Did it go longer than you kind of expected internally?
Right, yeah. I mean, it was like 18 days or something like that?
18 days for the first kill, and then it took several more days for another one, which is also a little unique. So
right, exactly. Overall, like in terms of the Sepulcher and that specific raid tier, we thought it was super fun, right? We heard a lot of great feedback about the raid itself. Like you just mentioned, there was a lot of awesome tuning in there and really interesting encounters like Halondrus, Anduin, Ry'Galon, Lords of Dread, and then finally with the Jailer, there was just so much awesomeness there. So yeah, we've been listening a lot to the feedback from some of the guilds that have been participating. We heard the feedback loud and clear that this one felt like it went longer than they were expecting or might have enjoyed. So we're definitely taking that into consideration, but overall, really, really happy with, how the tier has played out.
In terms of kind of how long it took, there's a lot of different theories and kind of discussion points on why it took so long. And one of the ones that I keep hearing come up is the fact that, and I know this is kind of a Race to World First unique problem, but is splits. The number of splits that players felt like they had to go through in order to be able to get their 4 set, for example. I think some people have said a lot of the hype got taken out of the race because day one, Mythic's available. What are we doing? Oh, we're running Heroic. We're running Rumble, right? So did that feel right to you guys? Did you expect to see them go into Mythic? Did you kind of think that might end up happening? And then I know there was a decision made to not allow tier sets to be traded until you'd already gotten a tier set. And it wasn't just about item level. It was, no, you actually have to have gotten that tier set to be able to trade that. So do you still feel good about that decision? Do you think in the future you might do something different? And just generally, how do you feel that like the way itemization caused these extra splits caused the race to go longer? Kind of, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. I'll see if I can answer one piece at a time. You might have to remind me if I miss one or not there. But
I will.
In terms of the length and what some of the underlying causes there, I think first an interesting point is that we did something new this year, right? We broke the raid in half, where you couldn't see, the Lords of Dread, Ry'Galon, and the Jailer until the week Mythic opened. And there was actually 2 pieces of tier set in that section of the raid. which, like you said, we were in the same boat as you. We were all walking into the office like, all right, we're starting to look at Mythic, and we're like, wait a minute, they're doing splits. We're not. This isn't normal. Like usually they do splits later when they found the first hurdle of the raid, and they need to start gearing up for that. So that was definitely something that was unique to this raid, the Sepulcher, where we had the back half kind of behind Anduin, who in his own right could be almost an end boss, and was really, really epic encounter. So that was definitely something that kind of led to we've discussed and feel like that definitely had an impact on the duration here. Is they rather than being able to do a lot of the heroic splits the week before, that was something that had to happen the week of Mythic. So that was definitely a part of that. Tier sets, like you mentioned, for sure had an impact there, right? Like not only could they not work on the splits to get their 4-piece because they were missing 2 of those pieces from the end bosses, or the last 2 of the last 3 bosses, but that also meant that like they were doing normal splits, right? They were like, we'll just went the 4-piece, let's go do normal, which is additional time that they were having to do there. And then, like you mentioned, we had, I think someone mentioned that this is the most challenging tier we've ever released in terms of total number of, attempts. Attempts isn't always the most accurate, metric.
Time spent on boss too.
Time spent on boss, right? Like one attempt that you wiped in 30 seconds is not the same as, a Sylvanas, and a last phase attempt, right? Like those 2 things are not the same.
Of course.
But it does generally speak to, it was a very challenging raid tier. And we had some encounters that were a little bit earlier in the tier that we wouldn't have expected to be as challenging as it were. Like Halondrus is a great example, which is an epic encounter. A lot of people are talking about how it's like, one of their one of their favorite encounters that they've done in a long time. But it's also, I think, like boss 7 or something, which is not an encounter where you would expect to hit like a 300 attempt kind of wall there. And that's a fun example of what we were talking about earlier, where HPS and DPS are one thing, but like coordination, right? Like execution, personal responsibility is something that is definitely lives in that like more of an art when it comes to tuning section. And the bombs and having those the interactions there could cause a wipe at any moment was definitely something that we were like, oh, okay, this is really hard. And having that kind of an encounter difficulty a bit earlier in the tier, definitely, I think, that boss, I think, took a couple of days for most people to defeat versus a couple of hours potentially for the boss right before that. So those are definitely all factors there.
Yeah.
Did I miss any of the parts of that question?
I guess you covered all the factors. I think the big question is, does that maybe change some of your philosophy going forward? I mean, so I understand Halondus was very difficult and it was boss 7, but then Painsmith was also right in the middle of the tier and it also took hundreds of pulls, right? So, right. I mean, I think people are now starting to, is that going to be a thing in the middle of the raid now? Are you happy with where that is in the position of the tier, that kind of thing?
Yeah, totally. That's a fun question. Right? So we've actually, anytime we're developing a raid, we have certain, almost archetypes of bosses that we talk about, right? Like you've got your council fight. You have the community, I think Levinly calls it like the patchwork fight, the fight that's just like raw damage throughput. We do, on our team definitely talk about that. We call it the Gore Fiend fight, right? Like the Gore Fiend or the Ashvane, which was, back in Hellfire Peninsula or Palace. There was that boss that's kind of, that first big hurdle, right? Well, and it's just the first big hurdle, right? Like, okay, here's a really first real test of the raid. When we do our tuning, we actually have like a fun, almost color coding tuning targets where it's like, yeah, you've got green, which should be really easy, and then yellow, which is a little bit of a step up. And mythic difficulty, it's almost as if it's 2 difficulties in one, right? It's almost like a heroic mythic where we have, orange and red bosses also that we have different tuning targets for. And that first orange boss is really where, encounters like Gorefiend and Ashvane, Painsmith, Halondrus, things like that is where you start to see that, okay, this is a noticeable step up in difficulty here. In terms of I think trying to think back to like what was Ashvane and Gorfine back in the day, those were closer to like 30, attempts, whereas Painsmith I think was over 100, Halondrus was over 300. So like there's a delta there that we will definitely be talking about, like maybe too big of a step up.
Right.
But very much, when you step into that new kind of tier of encounter within the same raid, we definitely have, different targets for our tuning there.
That's fair. Speaking of tuning and things of that nature, you mentioned this is first time that I can remember, and correct me if there was another time, but where we had the final bosses go completely unlooked at, right? And that you've held them back for a week. No PTR testing, they're not even out heroic week, that kind of thing. So that obviously, not only not being on PTR puts that much more pressure on your own QA team, right? It also means that it's completely untested by the outside world. People never seen it. You don't really have an idea of how it's going to look when people actually get to it. Are you happy with how that played out in general? Is that something that you're looking to do in future raids, is kind of hold back those final bosses?
Right. I mean, this is kind of, just an expansion of something that we have always done, which is, we have, at least in recent memory, never tested the mythic end boss of a raid tier. That's always been something that we've held back. We'll likely continue to do that and hold that back from testing on PTRs. There's just something about the excitement of all that being new, and the what if, is there going to be a secret phase or something like that? So with this tier in particular, there was really like a awesome narrative hook for splitting the tier up like we did by that 1 week, because as you encounter Anduin and you start to learn about the domination magic and how are we going to combat this to encounter the jailer, that was something that we felt like was a really awesome hook, and we had a great opportunity to kind of pay that off. And then as we were discussing that, I think I'm trying to remember now, was the Starting Zone podcast, I think, where I was even talking about we've been hearing feedback in the last few days about, whether we could hold that back from the PTR. And that was something that we had to kind of discuss and say could we support this? And determine, we totally can. Let's go for it. So I think, when we look at that, I'm really, really proud of, the work that the QA team did. We have our internal raid team that really did a ton of awesome work, not only testing these encounters for bugs, but also just the qualitative feedback and making sure that we, released the quality content that our players have come to expect without having seen it on the PTR. So I don't know that this is something that we would say, this is the plan moving forward. Mm-hmm. This was more of a, it makes sense to do this here, so let's give it a shot. I don't think this would be the template, moving forward.
Yeah, so when I spoke with Ian after Nyalotha, one of the things that he brought up was that the typical QA testing for a raid boss is they'll spend about 12 hours on a boss as a group, and then they'll have individual testers go and test the mechanics and things of that nature, not necessarily as a group. Has the QA on raid bosses sort of been elevated now that there's this massive audience watching it go down, or is it kind of the same posture it's been since BFA? What does QA look like for these bosses internally?
Right, totally. I can't, speak to the exacts of that.
Sure.
I'd have to ask one of the QA,
No
leadership team to come on board and talk about that. But, it is very rigorous. We have different kind of milestones that we aim to hit. Hey, this is the first time this team has seen this. Let's get some feedback on it. And usually that is at very high level, is this fun? We're not talking about this ability hits too hard at that stage. It's more do I need to redesign things here? Does this structure work? And then we have, kind of escalating play tests as things come online, from mythic play tests to the tuning play tests. And then depending on, where a boss might be in the raid tier, depends on how much time that they'll look at it from a play testing perspective. The jailer, we might, ask the team to, however much time we can get, the more eyes we can get on this, the better, because we really want to make sure that this is bulletproof, that it's super fun. There's no really unfair or, too much RNG in any of the encounters. Let's try to identify that as best we can. And then the testing side of it of just let's look for bugs is very, very rigorous, from, awesome automation teams to the individuals looking for really clever uses of certain abilities or mechanics to see if they can cause some interesting interactions. So it's pretty awesome to see them, kind of work through those encounters.
Well, since we're already on the subject of bugs, I gotta ask the question: what happened with that method kill?
Yeah.
So
that's
the jailer,
a great question.
Recap, right? The jailer is supposed to heal up when he goes to phase 4. Visually, it appeared he was walking towards the center of the room, didn't heal up. It looked like the guild already had the DPS. They probably would have had a great attempt.
Yeah.
Ultimately got the kill. We're hearing that pieces potentially went through the same thing. So what have you heard? Is this still an in-progress thing? Like, what's going on with that?
Yeah, totally. I mean, this is, still in progress, like just before this, pieces had killed it, and they actually kind of tweeted out what was the cause of that. And before they had sent that out, we were very much looking into what was going on. But before, like you said, before I kind of dig into what happened here. Yeah, I don't want to take anything away from method. Like, they were getting very deep into phase 4. Phase 4 was never meant to be, the most challenging phase of that encounter. That's more of the okay, cool. Did you make it through this transition cleanly? Did you not mess up any of your defiles? Do you still have all your people alive? Cool, you're gonna get this. It was fun though, watching the live reactions with people figuring out Mortal Strike works on that heal, which was totally intentional. We've had a much larger, emphasis as a team, both on the combat side and on the encounter side, to really emphasize utility. And that's been really, really cool to see kind of the different guilds find, optimizations that they can make with different utility. We've seen how many epic, life grips did you see on Ry'Galon? And I love seeing the gateway, the warlock gateways, and how they kind of use that resource and around which mechanics. So getting Mortal Strike kind of into the picture was very much an intentional choice there. But him not healing at all, we were like, well, that's strange. Originally, we had thought it was more of a
edge case timing of when do you push into the transition. Oh, maybe if he's doing one of these things, he won't cast his heal. We're not able to reproduce that internally by playing with that timing based on what we were seeing. And it was, like we said, it was extremely hard to reproduce, very specific circumstances. I think at one point Raider.io even tweeted oh, Blizzard fixed the bug. We haven't seen that happening in the attempts that have been happening since then. And we're like, no, still working on it. But that just speaks to, how hard that was to reproduce. Since then, I think pieces have defeated it. They kind of tweeted out what was happening there. Like I mentioned, it's still an in-progress situation. We're still trying to understand, is this an isolated incident with the jailer? If it is, this is one of those things where we don't want to create an unfair advantage for one or two alliances over another. So we would wait until, a weekly reset to fix the bug, maybe come out with some adjustments to kind of accommodate for that. But in this particular case, we're trying to understand just how broad of an impact there might be.
Fair enough. All right, going to pivot to itemization a bit. So we've already talked about tier sets, and I think is the general sense, you can keep this answer fairly short. Do we like tier sets? Will we be doing tier sets in the future, or are they just a temporary thing we're bringing back?
Yeah, totally. I think the excitement around tier sets has been heard loud and clear. Seeing how people's engagement with it have been, the excitement around some of the interactions that it has with your class, and getting that to turn on feels really, really cool. Tier sets we still love. Okay. We definitely want to continue to carry them forward. Okay. It's one of those things that we missed and are happy to see them back. Oh, I think you did ask about tier set trading and how we kind of changed some of the tradability rules. I didn't have a chance to talk about that.
Yeah.
We will likely talk about this more. I think trading and, kind of the rules around trading in our game are something that come up pretty frequently. Mm-hmm. This was a case where we wanted to try to prevent some potentially degenerate gameplay that would be super unfun for a small group of people by making a very slight rules change that would hopefully prevent people from having to do unfun things and
the reality of the situation is we saw that, well, we just made a new hoop, and they're going to find a way. They're going to find a way to get through that hoop. So yeah, I think in hindsight, well, that's definitely a change that we'll need to talk a lot more about, and especially, the impact that it has on the broader player base, right? Is this making anyone's experience in like a normal raiding guild less exciting? And if that person is having a worse time because of trying to prevent some really unfun behavior for like some of the world first guilds, that's very much something that we don't want to cause problems like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely a thing we'll be talking more about.
I think that really speaks to another question, which is, we had shards of domination in Sanctum, right? And I knew people that had been raiding consistently for months that for whatever reason, through bad luck, just never quite got there, right? And we know this time around, for tier sets and things, you have Creation Catalyst that's going to eventually, be available. You had double legendaries available in week 3. It feels like there's still a significant RNG element to kind of when people gain their power, right? And we see that you all are doing things like the Creation Catalyst to help deal with that a little bit further into the tier. But then there's also that situation of someone that is raiding in a high-end guild and I'm not getting my tier set. Am I going to get put on the bench now? Is there a room for us to maybe reduce the RNG component? With Shards of Domination, really, I think a lot of people felt like it kind of missed the mark in terms of that randomness. And then even with tier sets now, we're seeing folks that are like, I still don't have 2 pieces at this point. How do you talk to me about some of the discussions you all have had internally about that based on the feedback you're getting?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just about like, essentially it boils down to the question of viability, right? Like, if I don't have this thing or do have this thing, do I feel like my character is viable?
Right.
That's a big part of that. I think there's a lot of nuance in that conversation, but where we kind of circle around the discussion is, where's that line of, whether or not if I have this thing or not, do I feel like my character is complete or viable? I think you can say like, okay, there's, I don't have my boots that have the wrong secondary stats. Like, that's a different conversation than say my 4-piece that really turns on a much larger power gain. And when we talk about things like that, I think there's a threshold question of, okay, this is a thing that we need to try to make sure that we, cut the long tail off of and make sure that if you put in this much effort, or it's been this much time, let's create a more deterministic path for you to get that thing, which is really the goal with the Creation Catalyst is, okay, if you haven't done the thing or if you haven't gotten the thing by now, we're going to make sure that there is a path for you to kind of achieve that. And that's where a lot of the conversations have been circling around, and where you're seeing, the implementation of that. And, very recently, there's been lots of discussion on the internet of people, hey, can you turn it on now? Can you turn it on now? Can you turn it on now? So that's very much something we're keeping an eye on. We will continue to kind of talk about timing and what that might look like moving forward. But that has definitely been in our, collective consciousness in the last few weeks.
Okay. Different itemization type question. Obviously, the vault was a huge feature of this expansion, and obviously it was a big change from the last couple of expansions with the weekly chest, and you may or may not get something useful to you. Are you pretty happy with the vault? Is that probably what we're going to be seeing going forward? Any innovation around that you're talking about, or is it, are you pretty happy at this point?
Yeah, I mean, going into season 3, I'm sure you saw there was actually some, I feel, pretty substantial changes that we made there. Mm-hmm. Not only around the, different targets of how much engagement you need to get different options available to you. But for me, the part that was really important that we wanted to focus on was, if you don't want to choose an item, what do I get, right? Mm-hmm. When we launched Shadowlands, I want to say it was like, you got some Stygia or something, right? Like from, the currency that you would have gotten from the mall. But one of the goals with that Great Vault is that, you are always excited on Tuesday, right? You should always log in and be like, cool, what am I going to get? And maybe I didn't get the item that I was hoping for, but I got something cool anyways. And we've made a lot of changes with season 3 to kind of bolster the options on that vendor. And like you might have seen, the item that adds a socket is on that vendor now. So maybe I don't get quite the item that I want, but I can get, an item that will, essentially give me some power on one of the previous items that I've earned that are really, really good. So that's something that we've really been talking a lot about, is just like, we always want this to be exciting. How do we increase that excitement? How do we make sure that there's something that you're really interested in? So overall, really happy with the, increased agency, kind of that one-stop shop for, hey, like do some Mythic Plus, do some raids. This is all kind of driving for this almost like weekly activity that you can kind of engage with. But just want to make sure that that excitement is being paid off.
That's fair. So it sounds like we'll continue to have a system similar in nature. You'll continue to make sure the excitement level's there, but it's not going away necessarily.
Right.
So, okay, let's pivot to the economy. This has been a thing for several expansions. I think WoD really introduced a lot of gold into the economy in a big way with all the table missions and everything. As the race has been elevated in prominence, it sort of feels like the cost of the race has just been escalating through the roof. And I think a big part of that is just more competition at the top, right? But I think one of the effects of that is that it has caused things like legendary mats to go out of reach in terms of being available to the common player. And I know, of course, you made some changes recently to some of the components, making it a little bit easier to get. But generally, are you happy with where the economy is situated, or is there anything you're looking at to maybe reduce, let's call it the wealth gap between wealthy players and average players, if you will?
Yeah, that's definitely something that we are constantly monitoring. With any economy question, there are layers, and this is quite complicated.
I'm sure.
But
that's why we got a whole hour.
Yeah, I mean, speaking about, kind of the legendaries and how it interacts with the economy and the gold costs and where that's at. I think, speaking to kind of something that we looked at and what we were targeting with some of those changes and, mistakes that we had made going into season 3, when we had first released, that system, and, the different legendaries and the rune forging and Soul Ash with Torghast, something that we really wanted to make sure that we were achieving was that trying things out should feel like there's a low barrier for entry. And if you might have remembered, right when Shadowlands launched, like the auction house was flooded with some of those lower item level patterns or, base items. And it was relatively inexpensive to just try something out and make a new legendary. But if you really wanted to push it to the highest item level, that's where it started to become a bit more expensive. Through the course of the expansion, I think we might have missed the mark a bit on raising that floor and making sure that, okay, maybe I can craft like a normal raid item level legendary for relatively cheap and try things out. That's really been something that we've been focusing on improving, is making sure that that cost of just, I need to upgrade my legendary to even feel like it's at like the new, minimum bar for this patch. That's where I think we've been putting a lot of our focus, at least in terms of legendaries. And then to your previous point, something that we always keep a very close eye on. And I'm trying to remember the raid tier now. It might have been Nathria actually, where at launch, there was quite a bit more slot coverage with BOE gear. There was a lot of stuff that you could just go to the auction house and buy mythic item level BOE gear. And that was something that we tried to keep a very close eye on in terms of like, okay, how much like of my coverage of all of my items can I just go to the auction house and fill up? And that was something that moving into Sanctum, moving into Sepulcher, we tried to, be much more tightly tuning on that front. And that's kind of where it's like, okay, if you can buy a couple of items that feel really strong, that seems totally cool. But there is a threshold there where it's like, okay, this starts to feel like too much. Let's make sure we're reining that back in. And you should go do some Mythic Plus, some PvP, stuff like that to be able to fill in the gaps there.
Yeah, I think the tuning has definitely gone the opposite end of the spectrum from Nyalotha, when BOEs with high corruption, even if the item level was low, were infinitely more powerful, right, than some other things. Actually, I got yelled at by Preach for not asking a question about that at the last interview. So it seems like some lessons have been learned there in terms of how to handle BOEs, to the point where this tier, they weren't really, like, they were kind of a negligible factor completely.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Totally. I mean, that kind of gets back to that, the itemization and how the different groups have been gearing up. And, thinking about it now, to your previous question about like, hey, there were so many splits. It's been interesting seeing kind of the evolution of that, right? Once upon a time, the limiting factor there was, well, how many characters do we have that can clear this raid? Like I have to, as a raider in one of these guilds, have to make so many characters so that we can just get through the raid to get the gear where we want to get it. Watching kind of the evolution where they're engaging the community more and kind of running the individual characters through with a fewer number of guild members has been very interesting. And I think also kind of contributes to that element of, we can just do more splits and get more gear and, kind of tune the compositions more carefully with the gear that we need. And that's been like an interesting almost mentality shift to see with the people that are, at the top end. It was funny. We were watching, I think it was when Liquid and Echo were progressing, or it was Liquid was progressing on Lords of Dread, and I think Echo was still on Anduin. And when Liquid got to Lords of Dread, I think it basically hit the berserk timer, like the game over timer, and it was like at 13 or 14%. And we were talking about it like, that's a lot of health. Like, is this killable? We talk a lot about like, is this doable? This is doable, right? And often that was where you would see splits start to happen, is at that point, like, okay, let's go do splits. But the fact that they had already done that, I don't want to like, speculate, but in my head, I was thinking, okay, well, this is where the learning starts. Like 13%, like I've seen some of these guilds pull out way bigger gaps than that. And just through mastery, through learning, through optimizing, like, okay, if I take a few less steps here, I get an extra cast in. That's where the real learning kind of begins is, okay, we hit the Zerk. Cool. How do we optimize? How do we swap the comp up? Where do we use our timers differently? Versus this time it felt like the first step was, well, let's go do some more splits versus previously the first step was, or at least, sorry, from my perspective, previously the first step might've been, well, how can we optimize? How can we learn this?
So I think Sylvanas is a great example of that, where Echo hit 50, thought, where are we going to get 5% more out, and then managed to do so. But I think there's a difference between bosses where you hit the berserk timer and then it's an instant wipe versus the boss like Lords of Dread where let's just extend the fight by a whole minute. Was that surprising to you? Was that amusing? Like, how did that go across?
That was great. I imagine that was unexpected, and that is certainly part of the conversation when we're talking about like, is this killable? Because you have a boss like Ry'Galon where it's like, okay, like the game over is game over. Like you're done. Like there's no squeaking out even an extra 5 seconds of damage here. And we've actually been kind of leaning into those types of game over timers that are really, they just are more flavorful and more impactful, where it's like, oh, wow, this is the last, big bang or whatever it might be that really finishes off the game over timer versus kind of like the more old school, just the boss gets big, turns a little red and starts hitting 500% harder. Those are used much less frequently now. But I do still think those have a place, right? Like it is fun watching kind of the bosses run around and kind of slowly one-shotting people as you try to eke out some more damage. So that's not really like the starting place anymore, but I do still think those create their own unique kind of flavor and texture of, okay, well, how much more damage can we eke out of here? How can we be clever about this last few seconds that we get versus one that just says like, okay, you're done, like lights out.
Yeah, I think this speaks to what you were talking about earlier too, which is using the utility of the class and kind of allowing that to thrive. And, I think we saw some very clever use of the way that certain classes and even covenant abilities were designed that allowed them to extend that fight more. So it seems like it kind of plays into your philosophy a little bit there too. So.
Yeah, watching, the door shadows, very clever, like optimizations with mobility is definitely something that is really exciting to see on our part. We often try to build, as encounters, we try to build really fun puzzles for the players to solve. Mm-hmm. And then on the combat side, we try to give them, interesting tools that they can use to solve the puzzle. And seeing, there's some degree of like, oh, I hope they figure this out. Yeah. like, as we mentioned, the jailer and the mortal strike thing, like that's a whole lot of damage you're going to have to find if they don't kind of discover the mortal strike kind of tactic there. So sometimes it's a little bit scary to see that play out, but I think providing those opportunities to say like, hey, here's the toolbox, here's the cool things, go find interesting solutions leads to a lot of really awesome, exciting kind of moments, as it were.
That's fair. I know this has already been answered, but I kind of want to hear it from you again. In the last couple of expansions, we've had 4 to 4.5 raids. I'm just curious. It felt like with Shadowlands we just had the 3. Was it always the plan to only have 3, or did something get cut at some point just based on there was a lot going on in the world, right? We were all home and that kind of thing, and in the future for future expansions, I mean, is there a target number of raids that you intend for an expansion, or do you kind of figure it out as you go? Like, what's the general philosophy there, and was there supposed to be another raid at some point?
Right. I mean, for the Shadowlands, this was always the plan. That was kind of what we felt made sense for the story we wanted to tell, how kind of everything was unfolding. And certainly there are, other opportunities. Like, we've done kind of smaller raids in the past. Like, we, saw Trial of Valor in Legion, and we had another small raid in BFA. And like, often those raids kind of stem out of really interesting story beats of like, oh, there's kind of this, like, for lack of a better term, like a B plot that's going on. Like, it would be really cool to kind of wrap that up in a really epic way. And a lot of this happened very organically. In terms of like the philosophy moving forward, again, that is something that we try to do what makes sense for the setting and the story and the pacing of an individual expansion. And that's, moving forward, definitely what we'll continue doing. We did have, however, I'm sure you might have seen information about a season 4 that we're really excited about. Yeah. Will be coming in the not too distant future, where we're really, excited to kind of experiment with that idea of kind of revisiting some older content that we think still holds up. It's still really, really fun content, but it's just something that we've kind of graduated out of from an item level perspective or whatever it may be. So for the raids, we'll be revisiting some old raids with some interesting twists. And there was even a really fun kind of community poll for like the Mythic Plus community of, hey, what other dungeons do you want to see get added to the Mythic Plus pool? And I think last I checked, it was Grimrail and Iron Docks are pretty far ahead there, so that'll be fun to see. Which, by the way, with Grimrail, I know there's been some conversations around like accessibility and motion sickness, and that's very much something that we have been keeping an eye on, and might even have a really clever solution for that one. So keep your eyes open for potential information there.
Yeah, a lot of the dialogue I saw around Grimrail had to do with that, and I think that even was dialogue back when it was current content. Now that it's coming back, it's certainly worth looking at, but also just how are certain affix is going to work in there. It's just the tight spaces and things, right? So looking forward to seeing how people figure that one out. That's for sure. Mm-hmm. That's for sure. I do have a couple questions about season 4, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. I want to wrap up some of the Race to World first questions. So first off, after Nyalotha Ian conversation, one of the questions that I asked him was just about the level of support that the Race to World first received from the team. And at the time, the level of support was basically a few people have email addresses because they met somebody at BlizzCon, and they'll email people, and maybe they'll get help and maybe they won't, it depends on the time of day and things of that nature. And I'll quote what he said. He said, it's clear that our level of support, it just needs to level up, was the words that he used. He said that y'all were talking about staffing changes and things that we can do to make sure that people are never left in the dark. So I understand this time around, it was pretty widely known that there was a Discord available for some of the top raiders. And if a guild that wasn't expected to be in the top made it, then they would get added to it. There was some better communication there. I'm just curious, though, overall, what are some of the changes you've made this expansion as a whole team to better support the Race to World first? Has there been more formalized planning going into these? I'm not just thinking about design, but, with QA, community, and marketing, just all across the board.
Yeah, totally. Like you might have mentioned, spinning up that Discord was definitely something that we felt would be really important to try to keep as even a playing field as possible when it comes to the flow of information. We feel that's been really, really successful. That's been awesome to kind of, allow much more direct communication where, like Ian mentioned previously, we would just send some emails and say, hey, as a heads up, thing is happening. That Discord, it was really fun kind of having that very open communication with those guilds. And also, there was opportunities to, if we might have seen something, be able to more clearly say like, oh, we're thinking about making some changes. Here's what we're thinking about making as a heads up. this is what we're going to go forward with. There was a fun, incident that I think happened on like the Liquid stream where someone, I think they were working on Lehuvium, and their strategy revolved around actually killing, multiple of those ad packs in that before they were activated. And there was some conversation on like, ooh, that's actually not something we were intending, but that's obviously, a big part of the strat. And I think someone like on the broadcast caught wind of that conversation happening on the Discord and was like, oh, they're going to fix it. And we're like, whoa. That's not something we've talked about. This is just more of a like, hey, here's the direction of the thing we might be thinking about changing. So those conversations were a lot more organic. And, that was definitely something that we felt was a major improvement and a big, kind of leveling up of the communication that happened there. Same with the live support on our team. Like there was a lot more clear communication between not just the encounter team, but also like, hey, our live ops team, like our server team. Let's make sure that we have availability for people if we need to make kind of some late night changes, and trying to set up a much more clear scheduling and expectations there for our team. This is more, like you mentioned, I think the last time we had talked about this was Ian mentioned it during, the post Battle for Azeroth rating, but almost, more accidentally, we have a lot more availability for working from home, which has actually made this like so much more responsive on our part, right? Like once upon a time, you might have to drive into work to send a fix where everyone is really much more situated to be able to, just kind of open their work computer and send a change much more rapidly. So that's actually been something that has changed over the course of Shadowlands from where we were in Battle for Azeroth. That has really, been a major benefit for, we feel, the community.
Okay. Are there, based on the race that just ended, clearly you've done a lot this expansion to further the support. Are there additional areas in which you feel like you need to improve or that you're talking about, maybe for next year at this point?
I think we can always be better. We can always do better with communication. That's something that we're going to continue to look at ways where we can improve there. That's been a really big goal of not just our team, the World of Warcraft team, but Blizzard as a whole has been trying to really level up our communication game. We've seen the Community Council as something that's been spun up recently. New initiatives like this Discord channel for the Race for World First. That's very much something that we've been trying to be a lot more clear about our intent and what our plans are moving forward. And I think there's always more we can do to continue to improve on that front. I think we've made some awesome changes, and I think there's more to be done there as well.
All right. So do you think the Race to World First is an esport or not?
It's coming right out with it, huh? Yeah, I personally really love kind of the grassroots, community-driven, like organic nature of it. I think when it comes, I think this is a fantastic event. It's extremely unique in kind of the gaming space, and I think that's part of what we all love about it, is that how unique it is and how it is very organic. I think we will continue to do everything we can to make sure that that is a fun experience and make sure that the content that they're engaging with is at the highest quality bar and that the tuning is really tight and feels really good. But when it comes to just like, the organization requirements around it, I think that's something that is, has firmly been in the community's hands. And as we've seen, it's just such an awesome event. It's so much fun. I forget who I was talking to recently about it. It was like Saturday and we were watching the Twitch stream. I was like, this almost feels like a mini series reality TV show, like watching all this stuff unfold, right? It's like such a cool, unique experience. And I feel like that's something that really happens when it's driven by the community.
So along those lines, the question was asked 2 years ago. It's been asked several times since then. And I know it's a really big discussion. It's not something that you can overnight do something like a simultaneous reset. You've got different regions. The maintenance patches go out at different times. What's fair for one time might not be the same for another, things like that. There's a bigger issue there too, I think, which is just in general at Blizzard with the way the battle.net is structured and everything else. There are these different regions, and it is very difficult to play with your friends from other countries and other regions. And in 2004, when you had to have separate data centers, that made sense. So for me, I guess the question is simultaneously about reset timers and maintenance windows being on the same day, but it's also more of, is there ever discussion? I know it's a huge ops forklift to do it, but is there ever a possibility of having regions be able to just play with each other? Can we just eliminate regions? I know that's a little harder for China, but just in general.
Right. Wow.
Because
that would be
one of the best times of my life is when it's closed beta for an expansion and I can play with my European friends. Right.
Right. Yeah, totally. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, there's a lot of things that we want to change and make adjustments to with individual regions. We've talked about potential things with the auction house and what can we do with regions there, and heard a lot of feedback. Another big, kind of element of who can I play with there is something that, again, in upcoming patches with 9.2.5, where we're introducing cross-faction play. I think that will open up a lot of really interesting options when it comes to playing with your friends, which, ultimately, to your point, like, that is one of the main reasons we all play and love MMOs together. Is I just, I love experiencing this with my friends, and any barrier between me and that experience is something that we will often talk about and say, hey, what can we do here? Cross-region play is definitely something I would not be nearly qualified enough to talk about. That's something that, like, I would need to go ping our tech director, like, hey, what are the hurdles here? But that's definitely, a main goal of ours, is making sure that people can, play with their friends and get in and have it fun together. So definitely a thing for discussion.
Okay. So season 4 is coming out. We've got 3 raids that will all be relevant at the same time. I guess big question there are a couple clarifying questions maybe, and maybe some of these have been answered already, but are we still 4 difficulties for each raid? LFR, normal, heroic, mythic, right. It's just all been leveled up in item level?
Right. The exact specifics on which difficulties will be available are still being massaged, but definitely more than 1. I think normal, heroic, and then mythic and LFR, we are for sure talking about. And yeah, like, if it's a new season, there has to be exciting new, like, gear and incentives to go do it. So upping the item level is absolutely something that would need to come along with that.
Can we not have shards of domination be relevant? That would be great.
That feedback has been heard loud and clear.
Okay. Right on. That's good. And I guess the same question then this is not a don't do it, but it would be relevant for tier sets as well, right? It seems like if the tier sets are coming from Sepulcher, then does that then make that gear better than the gear you're getting from the other raids? Do you eliminate the tier set at that point? I guess that's a conversation maybe you're still having.
For sure, some of the details there are TBD. Yeah. We definitely still want sets to be a part of, the itemization. Like we just mentioned, people really are enjoying kind of the gameplay changes that come along with that, as well as just, having that goal and that really kind of unique element of raiding is getting that tier set from your raids. So that's definitely something that we want to include, but those are the exact questions that we are still discussing for sure.
So, season 4, the announcement included a statement that, season 3 will run for as long as a season would typically run, which is obviously very vague and not specific. I like the concept of a season 4 because the last thing we want to see is another Warlords of Draenor, Tanan Jungle, Hellfire patch that lasts over a year with no new content to play, right? It seems like season 4 is meant to be sort of a bridge to the next expansion that I'm sure we'll be hearing about in a few weeks. So I suppose... Do you have a sense for how long season 3 would last? Would it be 6 to 8 months? Is that probably a pretty good estimate, you think?
Yeah, I think that's generally where our seasons land, is in that time frame, and is for sure, certainly where our conversations, kind of the starting point is okay, is it time for new and fresh thing? So that's something that, again, it will depend on where the timing of the next update comes out, but that sounds in the ballpark.
Maybe about right. Okay, great. And then just one last question for you. So, it's actually been really cool lately to see Final Fantasy XIV Race to World first content, blind progression that they've been doing on that side. Those raids only take a couple days, even on the hardest difficulty. What, in your opinion, I know designers spend a lot of time playing other games and just understanding what else is out there, getting inspiration, things of that nature. Give me your sense. What sets World of Warcraft raids apart from other games like Final Fantasy 14 raids, or even Elder Scrolls, any other kind of raids that are out there. It seems like, wow, they're more difficult. I think a lot of times the encounters feel more epic, that kind of thing. Is it just the accumulation of years of design tools, or is there just a different philosophy that you think you guys have? That...
I mean, certainly, we have a ton of, big fans of Final Fantasy 14. I myself play quite a bit, or have in the past. Their raids are also something that we often look at in terms of like, hey, what are they doing? How can we kind of improve upon what we're doing and learn from our peers as well? In terms of the philosophies of it, one of the things I personally really love about World of Warcraft raids and just World of Warcraft like dungeon content in general is, one of our major goals is always trying to make it feel like this, it should feel like a place in the world. Like if I walked into this place, and as a human, it would feel like a place that I recognize and could navigate. And that's very much something that we try to build upon and really execute every raid tier, and with every dungeon that we build, is that sense of world and that sense of trying to make this feel real. Often that also comes with just a large number of raid bosses, right? Like if I'm walking into Castle Nathria, this epic castle in Revendreth, and you look at it and it's this huge centerpiece. That's a big place. Like I want to walk around and explore, and in some cases maybe even get lost in here. So we need to kind of fill it out and flesh it out and make it feel like the living, breathing place that we want it to, which tends to have a large number of raid bosses. So that's very much, one of our major goals, and we always strive to achieve that. And having those different, kind of raid difficulties hopefully always allows people to engage with that content and also feel like there's a sense of graduation, a sense of like, okay, we're a normal guild, let's go check out heroic, and having very clear, like evolutions of an encounter from normal to heroic, where you might add a really completely new and unique mechanic that, while it's the same raid boss, it feels very fresh and different. And I'm kind of relearning this thing that feels familiar, but is challenging in its own right. So that's very much something that we think is unique about how we work with World of Warcraft, and really want to just continue to evolve.
Very good. Very good. Do you, the one actual final question I have, where the heck did Halondrus go? Because he didn't die, right? He just kind of blinked off right there. Like people said they saw him like blink off in the distance. Is he dead? Is he like going back to collecting his, doing his AP quests for the week? Like where'd he go?
For Halondrus, the murder crab?
Yeah, the murder crab. Is he dead or not?
I mean, wasn't he supposed to be the mythic only jailer phase? Isn't that what we were speculating?
Exactly.
Maybe that's still to come. I don't know.
That's awesome. I love it. Well, perfect. Well, Morgan, thanks for taking some time and answering some questions. Really appreciate the transparency that the team has started to bring in the last few expansions, and talking with the community and everything. And, we can't wait to see what's coming out, I guess, on April 19th coming up here.
Discover hundreds of Blizzard podcasts. It works like this. Select your game by title. Then choose your content tags. Read the reviews. Now make your choice. The all-new podcast directory. Only at Warcraft Radio. Find your perfect podcast